let's get cracking on a Warhawk. Hi everybody, and welcome back to Plastic Models by a Regular Dude and part 2 of the AMT ERTL 1/48 scale P-40F Warhawk. So if you watched the intro video, jolly good. It is now time to start working on this thing. And we ain't gonna blab a bunch about it. We're just gonna dive right in with part 1. So as always, when I do a video on this channel, I start out each video showing how I cut the parts off, clean them up, and all that kind of stuff to assemble them for the first few pieces. After that, once you get an idea of what I'm doing and why, then I will do the cleanup and cutting off of parts off screen so I can just focus mainly on construction and paint. Part 1, we start with the instrument panel. So let's go ahead and find that and cut it out. Now there are two instrument panels on the sprue here, and it doesn't really say which one I'm supposed to use, and they do look a little bit different one from another. It also doesn't say what exhausts I need to use, so I need to look at the illustration on the box, and that might help me out. Okay, it looks like that this kit, this particular version, the F, uses these rounder looking exhausts. So I'm assuming this is the instrument panel that would go with it. So that's what I'm going to go with. So let's get the old cutters out here, my Tamiya really ultra-fine cutter, and we'll cut that away from the sprue. Now since these are flat parts, I'm going to cut it as close as possible to the part to minimize cleanup, since there's a junk ton of flash on here to deal with. So let's zoom it in a little bit here so I can see what's going on. Okay, so we got some flash around here. So using my X-Acto knife, now I have different kinds of knives and I use them for different things, and since I have some cleanup to do like around small parts and inside of parts, I like using a X-Acto type knife with a number 1 blade. That's just a regular old pointy old school X-Acto blade, and I'm going to use that, cut this stuff off here. Hopefully, you know what, I could probably use my cutter to do that. Now honestly, these rudder pedals, I don't really have to spend a whole lot of time on it, because it will be completely invisible once the cockpit is assembled and installed in the aircraft. So I'm just going to clean it up as good as I can without it being too stressful. Same here. That's pretty flashed up. This flash right here is kind of thick, but not that big of a deal to do. So what I'm doing is I'm just punching through it and cut all the way around. Trying to get it removed like that. So a little bit of history with me in the P-40. I have not built a P-40 since, oh man, '70s probably, maybe late '70s. And here's the funny thing. It was the old 1/32 scale P-40 by Revell. Now here's the funny thing. Back in the old days, I wasn't much on the paint. I detail paint stuff, but the overall paint, I didn't paint the overall paint. Why? Because it said right on the box, molded in color. So, how many of you did that back in the day? It was molded in color, so why paint it? It's done for you. Let me know in the comment section down below if any of you did that back in the old days. Or maybe still do it, I don't know. But anyway, it was, I can't remember what version it was or anything like that, but it was molded in a sand color. So it was obviously a desert aircraft. But I did have the desire to paint the canopy frames. So what did I do? I wanted to make sure that I had a color that was really close. So I cut off a piece of the sprue, went down to a local hobby shop called B&F Trains and Hobbies, and I took that piece of plastic in, and at the time I was using Model Master enamels. I really liked them. They worked really well for me for, you know, what painting I did do. So I took that little piece of plastic in there and I went to the counter. Can I help you, Sonny? Yes, sir. I need some paint to match this. And the guy looked at me like I fell out of a tree. Yes, he looked at me like I just, like, what planet did you come from? He's like, okay. So he went over to the rack and he pulled a couple off. And there was a couple that were really actually pretty close. It's like, oh, that'll do it. Thanks a lot. Paid for it. Off I went. That's the way I used to do things. So, yeah. But that was the last time I built a P-40. So I haven't done one since. And my old home slice Jim D sent me this this kit to build, and I'm really stoked because I do like P-40s. I just never built one in a long time. Enough of that. So now we're going to cut out parts 38 and 39, which are the side walls here. Actually, you know, this is what I'm going to do. This is what I like to do sometimes to make painting easy. So the bottom and the front, the parts that are not visible, that's where the sprue gates are. So in order to make this easy on myself, I am going to leave those two parts on this part of the sprue. So I'm going to cut this. And I'll check everything for flash. I'll cut this off here. And that way I can hold this in an alligator clip to make painting much easier. Alright, so I got that part cut off. So now I need to cut off the floor, which is this part here, 13, cockpit floor. Again, I'm going to get as close as I can. Cut it to make cleanup a little easier. Like that. Then using my handy dandy Infini model, Ultra Precision Series 400 grit sanding stick. Why that one? Because it's right there, handy. Now I really like these Infini sanding sticks. They work really well. Okay. Got that. Then we need Yeah, I could have left that on a sprue as well, but I didn't. So then we have C19 and C18. So that's 18 and 19 right there. This is where these really sharp sprue cutters come in handy, because it really reduces the risk of breaking these little small fine parts. Okay, got those. And then C41 right here, which is the gun sight. Normally, manufacturers supply these in clear, because this little part here is supposed to be a piece of glass. It's the actual gun sight and it's clear. However, this one is black. So I'll just paint it silver or something like the instructions say. I'm really trying to stick with this out of the box. Color callouts and everything. So, will it be all 100% accurate? Nope. But this is the first P40 in a line of P40s that I'm going to be doing. Okay, and then a little bit of sprue gate here. And I think I'm going to scrape this, because it'd be really hard to sand it. I'd be putting lateral pressure, sanding it, which would increase the likelihood of snapping the part in half. Or maybe even thirds. I don't know. Now my plan is, the sidewalls I'm going to leave off. I'm going to glue this control stick and this parking brake. I'm kidding, I don't know what that is, but I'm going to find out. I'm going to glue those in place. I'm not going to glue this in place because I want to be able to paint it and then highlight the detail on it. Okay, so we got that, and then I need part C40 and part I1 for the seat and the armor plate behind the seat. So here's the seat here. A lot of flash going on, so this is going to take a little bit of cleanup. And the armor plate here. Let's see, I'm going to do the same thing on here. Leave a bit of sprue on here so it'll make it easier to paint. Like that. Off. So you get the idea of what I'm doing here with these with cleaning this stuff up. So I'm going to do that off camera. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and glue this seat onto this back, since it's all going to be painted the same color anyway. So for that, I'm going to use Tamiya Extra Thin, and I've just got it pressed in place. And since it's open in the back, I'm going to apply my cement from the back like this. And hopefully it sticks. So there's that. this goes here. So I'm just going to kind of put it in place like that. And touch it like that. So that looks pretty good. So let's see. I'm going to stand it up in this here close peg, as people call them. Okay, so we got those. And then I'm going to glue these in place. This one here goes there. It'll be easy to paint those knobs and stuff on there. With them glued in place, and I don't have to worry about the parts not sticking well because of the glue. Because I'm the type of person, I like to glue parts on bare plastic and not on paint unless absolutely necessary. Alright, so let's let that dry up for a minute. Okay, while those parts are drying, I am going to go ahead and get this part out as well, because that needs to be painted the same color as the interior of the cockpit. So that is part A4. And again, I'm going to leave a bit of sprue on here to make it easier to paint. So cut it there and there. Like that. Sand that little bit of a burr off there. And cool. So get all this stuff ready here. All right, so I've got all of my parts on the sticks ready to paint. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to prime the parts. And for that I'm using Mr. Finishing Surfacer 1500 Gray, thinned with Mr. Leveling Thinner. So what I'm going to do in order to show this painting process, I am going to change my camera over to my other mount, and so as not to cause a lot of noise with the extractor, I'll be doing a time lapse with no sound. Okay, while that stuff is drying, that primer, I'm going to go ahead and start cutting out these fuselage parts and getting them cleaned up and ready for assembly. So let's take these, both sides of the fuselage, and cut them off. I'll zoom it in here in a minute when I need to, but for now we'll just cut these off. Then using my cutter, I'll cut it off as close as possible. Like that. Okay, I got these fuselage halves cut out, and ready to go. So I figured I'd do a little test fit here, and I have to say that I am astonished at how well these things go together. They really, really fit good. And I say that just, you know, in building model kits, even really good kits can have some fit issues and steps and stuff like that. And having never built an AMT kit, I am pleasantly surprised. There's not going to be much as far as cleanup to do on this, I'm thinking. So let's see, I've got those parts cut out, and then I need to cut out F1 and F2, which are panels that go here. So let's get those. Yeah, so F, that is the ones. And then I'll need the exhausts. And it does look like I need to use the flared exhaust, so let's cut those off. Like that, and get those cleaned up. And I'm going to have to clean these exhausts up because there's some there's a little bit of flash on those. All right. So the first thing I need to do is make sure these are going to fit on here correctly. Now, in some preliminary fitting, it's nice and flush at the nose here, and there is a gap in the back. Pretty good sizable gap too. So I'm going to have to do something about that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use some of this really thin plastic. Oh my goodness. Actually, I'll probably use this. This is a little bit thinner. I don't want it to be too thick because I'm going to have to do two things. First, I need to fill that gap right there. I think that'll be just, I think I will use this because I can always sand it down. So this is what I'm going to use for the back. But then there are some tabs right here to help hold this in place. The problem is this is thinner than the gap. This is thinner than this. So if you butt these up against those tabs, you end up with a step. And if you don't use those tabs, it's kind of hard to get it lined up properly along this bottom edge all the way back. So with this really thin stuff, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut a really ultra thin strip, narrow strip I should say, to run along the inside of this to make up that gap. That way I can clamp it and not have to worry about it being too far back. So we'll see if that's going to work. So the first thing I'm going to do is cut this long strip. And I am just going to cut it with this right here. Thusly. Okay. So we got that. Straighten it back out a little bit. Okay, and it's going to go right along here. So I'm going to need to cut a little bit of this off. Okay. So we got that. I think I'm going to use my extra thin quick setting on this. Just work my way up here. Okay, now I'm going to let that sit up for a second. And in the meantime, using stuff that's a little bit thicker, I need to see what size I need here. So I want to get it as close as possible to the shape. I'm going to sand it smooth, but I want to get it as close as I can. That. Let's see how that looks. Okay, it looks pretty good. Because I'm going to sand it. I'm going to sand it down. I'll probably have to place some panel line detail there, but actually I could do it on here and sand it here because the detail's a little heavier on this and it'd be easier to replace. So that's what I think I'm going to do. Okay, so now I'm going to have to let that dry really well. So I'm going to set those two parts aside and see what I need to do on the other side. Okay, we got some flash right here. Let's see. Okay, it's not as bad on this side. Not bad at all on this side, actually. So I may not have to do it over here. All right, so I'm going to let this other stuff dry up here for a minute. Okay, this has been trimmed down. So now I can think about sanding it. I want to be really careful not to remove too much of the surrounding detail. So what I'll do is I'll rescore that there, and there. Okay, that looks pretty good. So let's test fit it here. Pretty good, but I need to sand this down a bit. This part is hitting and there's a little bit of a gap there, so very carefully, a little bit at a time. A little bit more. Now, going into this kit, I'd read a lot of reviews, and the fit on here was one of the things that was complained about. But I think I've come up with a pretty good solution, pretty good way to fix it. Oh, look at that. That looks pretty good. Oh man, I'm kind of digging that. Pretty stoked. So before I get too much further, I need to rescribe panel line detail. What I'm using here is this scriber. It has like a very fine sawtooth. Edge on it. Oh, there we go. That looks pretty good. So I think what I'm going to do though is before I glue this in place, I am probably I think I need a little bit more. That looks all right. There we go. That's it right there. I like it. All right. So one more thing I'm going to do. I am going to use this 3600 grit thing and kind of polish it out a little bit. All right, that looks good. So I think that side's ready. So without boring you with repetitiveness, I'm going to do the same thing on this side. All right, both sides are done. So I did the same thing here, glued a strip to rest on those tabs, and oh yeah, I am really stoked with the way this has turned out. I don't know if I mentioned it in the previous segment, but it seems this was all of this was one of the complaints people had about this kit, was the fit of these engine covers. And I think I found a really good solution on how to fix them. So anyway, so before I glue these on though, I think I will hop over and paint the green on all those parts. So let me change camera angles here, and I'll put it on time lapse and paint that stuff. Alright, with that stuff painted, now I can move on to doing this fuselage stuff. Now what I'm going to do, I think I'm going to put these on first, and then in case I need to do any clamping or pushing from the inside or whatever, and then I will glue the fuselage halves together. Let me just double check my fit here again on this. Okay, now I have a little bit more of a gap on this side. So I can do one of two things. No, I think that's okay. So what I need to do is I'm going to glue the bottom first. And then I'll glue the front and over here. So let's see here. I think I'm going to sand just a little bit right here so it sits flat, because both sides seem to have kind of a, this is exaggerated, but kind of a cant like that too. It's very small, but I think I'm going to do that. So I use my 400 grit sanding stick so as not to remove too much material at a time. Let's see how that works. Oh, perfect. That is it right there. So I'm going to very carefully cement there. You know what? I'm just going to let that dry. Then I'll hit this from the inside. Okay, while that one's drying, I'll do the same thing over here. Except I'm going to start on this side here because I want to push this end down right here. So I'm going to let that cure up. Okay, now this one, what I'm going to do is I'm going to glue it. I'm going to hold it there from the inside, flex it out just a little bit to get a really nice flush fit there. So I'll put my cement on from the inside like this. And then push down right there, flex it out right there, and hold it. Okay, so all the bottom of this is glued, so I'm going to set that aside and then get back to this one. And I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to glue along the bottom, put a little pressure from the inside to get it to fit really nicely. See, that side fits really good, so all I'm going to have to do is just glue it from the inside like this. And let that dry. Stoked. You know what? While I'm here, I'm going to go ahead and do this part here. I'm not going to push on it because I don't want that seam line to get filled in. Sweet. So let's check this one again. Put the cement in on this side here. Like that. All right, so we'll let those dry. All right, next up, I need to paint some black. Now for this instrument panel, I could probably do it by hand, but I'm gonna cheat. That's not really cheating, it's just doing it a different way. I'm going to paint these instrument panels black, but I'm gonna spray them. How am I gonna spray that small, you ask? Well, I'm gonna mask it. So let me show you how I'm going to do that. I'm going to take my handy dandy Infinity Easy Cutting Type A mat, and I'm going to make myself some masks. Because basically all I have to do is just mask right between there, along this edge here and below. So just this portion here and this here will be black. So let's see, let's get some tape. This might work. Let's try this. So the way these things work pick a size, whatever size you want. And I'm thinking that this 0.8 might do it. If not, then I'll move it around and we'll do something else. But you just, all these marks are engraved, so you just drop your nice fresh blade in there. And pull it across. And kazowie. Perfectly straight. Can you do it without this cutting mat? Sure you can. But I don't do it without the cutting mat because it's really easy. And I know it's going to be really straight. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Yeah, there we go. I chose wisely. Okay, so then I just need to put a little piece there and there, and put a piece across the bottom, and we shall be good to go. And then we can peel all of this off. Like thusly. Voila, we have a nicely painted instrument panel. Now all I need to do is I'll use some, probably some silver just for the contrast, and just very lightly highlight all this just to get the detail to kind of pop out a little bit. I'm not worried about it looking like ultra, you know, realistic, accurate, whatever you want to call it, because it is going to be all buttoned up, but I do want it to look halfway decent. Alright, next up I need to paint these details, and the instructions call for painting it all black, and that's probably what I'm going to do. I may paint this little handle here on the throttle control. I may do that. Or is it this one? Is the throttle control? I'll have to check. But anyway, I'll probably do those knobs red just for a little bit of difference. Everything else is going to get painted black with white or silver for the knobs. So let me get some paint out to do that. I think for that I'm going to use my AK 3rd generation acrylic model colors rubber black, because it seems to work really well. So let me get my water. So I'm using a new brush here. It's a Tamiya modeling brush, high finish, number 0, but it's kind of a flat tip job. So let's see how it works. Pretty good. Yeah, looks good. So I'm going to paint this stuff. I'm not going to bore you with the whole painting process. We'll come back when it's done. Okay, now I'm going to switch over to a finer brush. Some of that smaller piping and stuff. For that one I'll use this brush here. It's got a finer point on it. Alright, and then I need to do grip on the control stick. Like that. And this little knob here. All right, so I'm gonna let all this stuff dry. Well, there's this little deal here. I don't know what it is, but not that it's ever gonna be seen. Okay, good enough. So I'm gonna let that stuff dry good. Then I'm gonna come back and I am going to do some dry brushing to bring out some highlights on all these items. All right, let's see how this works. I've got Vallejo Metal Color Silver, my brush, get as much off of there as I can and give it a go. That'll work. Yeah, that'll work. And I'm going to do the same thing on here just to pick out the edges. That way it doesn't look quite so flat. Just like that. All right, then I'll hit that knob, and that knob with red. Is it right? That's what I'm gonna do, just to get a little bit of color. And then the one last thing I need to paint is this gun sight shows that it is supposed to be gray. So let me find a gray here. And for the gray, I am using Ammo by MIG acrylic color brush and airbrush, medium gunship gray. So let's find an appropriate, I think I'm gonna use the same brush. I don't really need to paint the underside, but all right, there we go. There's that, and then I'll get a little bit of aluminum and paint the lens there of the gun sight. Vallejo acrylic model color. Airbrush colors aluminum. Just like that. And now, once that dries, I can start assembling the cockpit. Real quick, before I forget, I need to paint the radiator bits inside of here. And I'm kind of going to cheat, because I'm going to attempt to use my panel line accent color and see if I can do it that way. So let me show you what the plan is here. Touch it right in the middle. Blink, just like that. Boom. Look at that. Spectacularity. Same thing there. It's not quite opaque, but that's okay because it's got rib detail on it, and it'll keep it from covering it up totally. There we go. Just like that. And while I have it out, I might as well, or while I'm thinking about it, I might as well do the wash here. This is PLW Deep Gray, panel line wash Deep Gray. Let's see what it looks like. Oh, looks pretty good. Yeah, that's going to work pretty good. That stuff outlined a little bit, make it look a little more three-dimensional. Yeah, that helps a lot. Do the same here. I still got to paint those seat belts, but we'll get to that eventually. Oh yeah, look at that. Oh, I got to paint that headrest. I'll do that in black. There's that. And then on all these rivet or screw heads or whatever they are. Around the edges. These wires, this stuff is going to be invisible. But I'll do it anyway. Okay, I'm going to let that kind of dry for a few minutes, and I'll wipe off the excess. Okay, I set all those parts aside so they can dry. Well, you know what, let me check the wash here and see if I can. Oh yeah, there we go. Just using a dry Q-tip, aka cotton swab, aka earbud. I'm just going to wipe that off like that. Don't really need to do it there or there. All right, so now I've decided my next course of action. So I've got some gaps going on up here. Now, I didn't really notice those before. So I have a couple of courses of action that I can take. So I have gap there, there, and there. So I could potentially, using some sandpaper, maybe cut it about that wide and sand away right here on this part right there to where it fits more evenly across there. Okay, but I don't think that's going to work because I still have a bit of a gap back here and here, and I can't really, well, I could possibly close it up with a mighty squeeze. However, I do have another course of action, and that is go ahead and assemble the cockpit, everything that goes in there, put the fuselage halves together. Then, once all that is done, holy Toledo, if I get this thing to line up. Crikey. Okay, then what I could do is I could use some filler there and there, there and there, and basically sand all this, because this has got to be sanded. So sand all this smooth, and that would, I would lose everything here. But I could replace it. I could rescribe this, and then if I treat this, if I do this the right way, I can retain the bolt detail by using one of my smallest drill bits, and then just drill all those holes deeper to where they're way down below the surface. That way when it gets sanded, it'll sand it off, but it'll leave, since those holes will be deep enough, it'll leave them there. And I think that is what I'm going to do. So first thing I need to do is put the cockpit together. All right, here we go. So let's see. Make sure these parts are really flat for good contact. Scrape a little bit of this paint off here. For good plastic to plastic contact for the adhesive. Same here and here. Now sometimes I have been known to actually, using that Infinity cutting mat, make an ultra thin masking strips for contact points. Yes, I have done that. Call me crazy if you will, but oddly enough, I find masking stuff somewhat enjoyable. Yes, I can be somewhat strange like that. All right, so we're ready to start gluing stuff. So let's start with this here. Seat and armor plate. Put that in place there. Get my desk cleaned up. It's getting messy. There. And there. And for good measure, let's put some underneath. Stick my finger in the glue on the bottom. Okay, and then this one goes here. Well, I almost put that on there backwards. That one goes there. Now it doesn't indicate if these are supposed to be butted up against this back plate or not. So I think to play it safe, I am not going to glue the sides. I'm just going to glue the bottoms. That way, if I have to, I can force these parts outside. These outside parts, I can flex those back out. So I'll just glue it here, there, and there. Now the instrument panel will help determine the width it needs to be. But I'm going to let that set up just for a few seconds before I put this on. And while that's drying, I need to get out this here C42, which is the it's for the prop right there, because I gotta have a place to mount that propeller. Let's check out this here instrument panel. Okay, that looks pretty good. And it kind of butts up against these side walls, so you kind of push the bottom in like that and it should make it the right angle. Let's hope so anyway. Put a little cement there. A little right there. Alright, so now there we go. Now let that dry up a little bit before I start trying to wrestle it into place. Oh, better not forget to put these in. Do that real quick. Like that. Alright, let's do a test fit here. See if all the elements line up decently. See that move? That's why I need to let it dry. Looks like everything lines up fairly well. Okay, so I'm going to have to spray a little bit of something. There we go. There we go, that's better. I do need to spray the inside edge of that cockpit there though. But yeah, it seems to line up pretty good, so I need to let that dry a little bit more, but I also need to spray this inside edge. And I'm going to do that, but I ain't going to use no what you call primer for this because I want to get rolling. Okay, so I've got this in place. Now, the way it fits, this part fits inside of here. This fits right here. And the instrument panel fits underneath a little lip here. All right, does that make sense? So I'm going to glue this in place while I've got it all together here. And then as I hold that precariously, I'm going to try and glue this part in here. That. Then I'm going to put this here. And now comes the tricky part. See if I can get this together here. Okay, got that. Oh, crud. So I knocked that loose. I think I can glue this in after the fact. Maybe. Okay. I don't want to drop this because it seems to be fit in there pretty good. Okay, let's see if I can get this part in here. Okay, I got that radiator or whatever it is, the intake thing, that's put back in there. And I'm gonna have to spray the inside of that and then redo the black, but that's no big deal. Right now my concern is getting this cockpit in here. And it looks like it's all lined up pretty well. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna clamp this right here like that. Not actually, well, I may go ahead and glue that while it's there like that, because what I like to do on fuselage is do a section at a time where there's natural breaks. So like from here to here, the cement's only going to flow from there to there. That hole's going to make it stop. Then once I do that, I can move on. That way I can keep things lined up as good as possible. And there's less chance of stuff fitting weirdly. So that's going to be the first part I'm going to do here. So I'm going to get the cement, touch it right there like that, and clamp it, and make sure it's as even as possible, because the more even it is, the less I'll have to sand. So I got that. Now I'm going to glue the rest of the cockpit. So glue some there. Then touch it right here so it'll flow down the side. Use this toothpick here to make sure the instrument panel is pushed as far back as it's supposed to be. Like that. Glue it on the top. Using this cut off toothpick as a wedge, I got that cockpit or the instrument panel pushed back. So hopefully when the glue sets, it'll stay in place. So let's let that dry there, and while that is drying, I am going to look ahead here. It looks like I'm going to get these wing parts, cut those out, clean them up, and see if those are going to fit like they should. So we need, you know what, I'm going to hang out. I'm going to hold tight on that. Next thing I'm going to glue is this this bottom portion here. I'm going to try this quick setting. This. So I need to push that back just a little. Push that down like that and hold it. The way it keeps this panel line right there lined up properly. So let that dry a little bit. Next up, this seam here. I'm just going to use the regular extra thin this time. Like that. And tape to hold that. Like that. Let that dry. All right, so we've got this, and this glued. So now I think I will give the front up here a shot. So I need to peel this tape off a little bit. And I'm not quite as concerned about all this as everything else, because I am going to have to do some work on this as far as sanding and getting it smoothed out and all. So I'm not going to sweat that too much. But let's get cracking. Alright, so we got that. So let us pull this together, tape it. Get another piece of tape. This is kind of funny because I usually don't tape this kind of stuff, but I am in this case. I'm going to kind of hold this for a minute and make sure it's as level as possible, because I don't want to have to sand too much. And I really want this part right there by where the the windscreen goes. I want that to be perfectly flat, so when I fit that on there, hopefully it'll fit correctly. I think I'm going to use one of these clamps, because one thing I like to try and do sometimes is using this type of clamp. I can squeeze it, and if you have parts that are like this, if I squeeze it, or like this, if I squeeze it right, it can slide it up into position where it needs to go. And I think okay, that looks pretty good. So let's all right. Excuse me. Feeling kind of froggy in the throat. Okay, I'm not worried about that thing spinning, so I'm gonna go ahead and cement that as well in the front there. Now let's see if I can squeeze this front part tight enough to take up some of that gap there. Yep. Let's put some cement in there. And there. Like that. Okay, so I'm going to let that dry. While that is drying, I can work on these wings. Alright, before I glue these together, I need to spray that and that with some gray, neutral gray. And for the neutral gray, I'm going to use Tamiya XF53. So you've seen me paint some of the other stuff, so I'm not going to bore you with that again. So I will paint off camera. Alright, that's been painted gray, so now I can start gluing these wings together. So what I'm going to do, I've already scraped the paint off. So for that inside part, I'm going to use this orange top Tamiya cement. For that part there. Okay. I think what I'm going to do, I'm going to clamp that part because I don't want there to, even though it's not going to be seen, especially if I can manage to gear up this thing, I want to make sure that's sitting flat on those parts there. Let's take a look and see how that looks. Yeah, the height looks good. I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't getting any weird height difference. Okay, that looks good. All right, glue the other side. All right, now I can start gluing the wings together. So I'm going to start right here. Start working my way around. Just keep working my way around. All right, let's take a look and see if it dried up good. Okay, so we got a little bit of, like, for lack of a better term, a little bit of underhang here. So like it didn't line up quite perfectly, but it's all right because it's got to be sanded anyway. So that's no big deal. And I probably could have twisted it around and got it to fit right, but it'll be okay. Okay, wings are drying. So now back over to the fuselage, and let's get this part right here and the rudder. The vertical stabilizer and rudder glued together, and that will be all of it actually, and I can start working on all that. So get the cement, all right, get a little piece of tape. Just kind of bowed out just a little bit in the middle there. Whoops. Cross like that. The rudder, you know, I gotta say that I'm really impressed with the fit on this thing. because, you know, this one was boxed in 97, so I'm not really sure when it was actually tooled. But, you know, it's a few years old, and it's really, really a nice kit. So far, so good. So let's clamp this one right here. Whoops. I got to put new gripper pads on my clamps there. All right, so we'll let that dry. Okay, I put my toothpick spacer back in there and fit the wings, and that looks pretty good. I might be able to squeeze a little bit more out so I don't have to put any putty in there, but that looks pretty good. So that is the main parts of the fuselage and the wings put together. So I think I'm going to end this video right here. So that concludes steps 1, 2, and 6, except for the cleanup and actually attaching the wings, but I'm going to do the cleanup before I do that. So that ends part number 2 of the AMT ERTL 1/48 scale P-40F Warhawk. So stay tuned. Next time in part 3, I'm going to come back. We'll start with all that cleanup and continue on with construction. So if you liked this video and you want to see more of it, or see some of my other builds and such, hit the subscribe button. And yeah, as always, thanks for watching Plastic Models by a Regular Dude, and I will see you all later.